everyone around me thinks tour's a vacation. We only see the highlight reel. No one's putting up the video of them sick, coughing in a bunk, right? So it's not
Mm-hmm.
happening. Life kind of moves on without you. And I'm sure, you've had plenty of artists on here that I'm sure could talk about that too, where it's all their friends got married, all their friends had kids, and now they came home and they're kind of still in their 20s mentally, emotionally, where it's like, wait, life moved on without me. What do I do now?
You're listening to OurSpace with Matt Batisse.
Welcome to OurSpace with Matt Batisse. This is a show for millennials, some Gen Z and Gen X as well, that grew up listening to emo, pop punk, and all sorts of music under the alternative umbrella. You know, the kind of stuff that got us bullied in high school for listening to it. It's a show that allows us to connect with the bands that we grew up loving and, of course, discover new music in the same spirit of MySpace. But this isn't MySpace. This is OurSpace, and OurSpace is now powered by elderemo.com. They want to do the same thing, except they want you to do it in style with a bunch of awesome t-shirts, hoodies, and more. Whether you're headed to Warped Tour or waiting for your next show, they've got you covered with early 2000s peak scene lore t-shirts, some kitty shirts, really cute one that says Stink 182, and even stuff for your furry friends, like a little bandana that says Motion Kitty Soundtrack. Plus, if you head over to elderemo.com now and use the code OurSpace, you'll get 15% off your next order. Link's going to be in the description of this episode as well. Today's guest is Daniel Rinaldi. If you were around in the MySpace days, you may have heard of his band from the mid-2000s, Bedlight for Blue Eyes. He's doing something different these days that we're going to talk about today. He's providing mental health service for touring musicians. This show is designed for fans of music and for fans to connect with their favorite bands. But it turns out that a lot of music fans also happen to be musicians themselves. So we actually have a lot of listeners and viewers of the show that are musicians. And I think that this is incredibly important to have an episode like this, and sometimes to also just check in. So this is for the musicians, but also for the fans that kind of want a deeper look into the mental side of being a musician and what that's like. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show to have such an important conversation today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So tell me a little bit about Soundcheck Sesh. What exactly is it?
That was born out of kind of seeing a need that wasn't being met in the scene, whether that's artist or crew. There tends to be a million steps to help. And I was trying to think of how to take that away, how to make it so that there's not 4 million steps. There's easy entry points for artists, easy entry points for crew. And instead of kind of going one way with my practice, like I was kind of going, which is, you get out of school, you get your stuff, and you kind of do what everyone else is doing. I decided to kind of like go back into the music industry and provide services for artists, crew, management, venue work, who's ever kind of working in the industry, but also even people who are just a part of the industry, like even fans of the industry. I think it's just as important to make sure that you are taking care of your mental health.
So what exactly do you do? Is this like a therapy service or?
In my great state of Massachusetts, I provide therapy. For everything else, it is mental performance coaching. It is mental health services that basically consist of, everyone does it differently. So there are people who do one-to-one virtual sessions. There are people who do text-only sessions because that's easy for them. There are people who do 30-minute check-ins, 25-minute check-ins, or they do a full 60 minutes. So it kind of revolves around what's comfortable for the person that's kind of signing on to have these services, follow them around on tour or while they're at home. Yeah, they're just sessions where we talk about everything from hating being on stage to not liking sleeping in a bunk, how bad the food is, their troubles at home, all sorts of stuff.
So how exactly does it work?
Most of my requests for services come through Instagram, which is insane that social media can be used that way. So someone will hit me up. They'll either send me a DM or an email through my website, requesting services. Usually they'll give me a little bit of overview. And what kind of happens from there is they usually get answered within 24 to 48 hours. They get sent intake paperwork, which is just kind of all of the consents, all of the ethical, confidential requirements. And then from there, once that's all filled out, we're off to the races, and we book the session. That's different for everyone. Obviously, if they're on tour, it's a lot harder for them to kind of lock down a space or time to do that, but we pretty much can make it work. That's what I aim to do, was kind of take out the you have to be on a waiting list, or you have to email and no one gets back to you, or let's put you on this referral list. It was kind of like real help, real time from someone who's actually like lived in this space, that understands kind of either the grind or frankly the loneliness that comes with being on the road and then coming home from the road.
I know we talked a little bit about, or at least you mentioned musicians, touring crew. Like, who is this actually for, and who's, I guess, taking advantage of it the most?
Crew members. Crew members are taking advantage of it the most because they are literally the unseen people on tour, right? They're not the artists. The guys or girls or whoever in the band. They are the people backstage that aren't often being checked in on, or aren't often given the services that maybe the artist is getting given. So the people that are really taking advantage of it right now are your front of house people, are your lighting directors, your monitor techs, your guitar techs, people that are playing that backstage role, that when a tour does a collaboration with a company, the guitar tech isn't necessarily being looked at to get those services. It's mostly for the artist or people directly associated with the artist. So this is really working for that. There are artists and other people that I work with, but for the most part, the majority of the people are crew members.
Now, if there's any crew members listening, I really hope that they don't get offended by this, but, they typically are not the people that you think of first when it comes to touring musicians and bands and all of that, right? Like, you think of how hard it is on the artists because you just assume the artists are touring. And I think sometimes we forget that, hey, crew members actually tour and move from city to city as well. But with that being said, because most people don't necessarily think of the crew members in that scenario, what made you think of the crew members, and what made you think like, hey, there is a whole group of people that aren't being looked after, and there's a service here for these people. Let's start this service.
Right. So I was sitting, I kind of started to work a little bit with people that were on tour. And it wasn't really till I was sitting with my friend Andrew, who was front of house production manager. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but we were sitting together at I'll remember this forever. We were sitting together at the Mohegan Sun Arena. He was in town in Connecticut, and he was kind of talking about all the struggles that were going on the tour he was on, and what he was feeling, and kind of feeling like no one was noticing what was going on. And something that stuck out to me was, he was like, everyone around me thinks tour's a vacation, and they don't realize that it's not. It's not anything like what the highlight reel shows you, similar to any sort of social media thing that we see. We only see the highlight reel. No one's putting up the video of them sick, coughing in a bunk, right? So it's not happening. So it wasn't until that conversation, kind of posting something on Instagram and seeing the amount of people that really it resonated with, to where I was like, oh my goodness, like, what's going on here? I didn't know that this was something that either gets talked about in private or isn't getting talked about at all. What can we do here? And it was with his friendship, and unfortunately kind of the fire that grew after he passed, that was the starting point of like really going both feet in and providing extremely discounted services for crew members, and then kind of moving on to artists, managers, booking agents, kind of anyone who was in the industry that felt like they could benefit.
So this really started for the crew members and then expanded into musicians, not the other way around.
Yeah, pretty much. It kind of like the first batch of people I started working with were all crew members. And the only reason that artists started working with me was because their crew members were saying, "Hey, this is working for me," or this is really great that I have this outlet. Maybe you should try it. And that's kind of like this where this like cycle kind of happened, where it was like for every crew member, it was an artist. For every artist, it was a crew member kind of hitting me up and asking me about how we could work together, how we can kind of start talking.
Well, yeah, I can imagine being on tour together with people, whether you're the artist or the crew members. You're on the road together, you're talking and recommendations. So, it can easily grow that way. When it comes to the crew members, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing that they find on the road?
A lot of it is the coming home and then going back out. It's those transitional times where you're constantly on tour. Um, you're going city to city. The crew, the artist kind of gets to go back to the green room. The artist gets to go back to the hotel, whatever happens. And sometimes the crew's there to 4 a.m, loading out, putting things where they need to be. And then they're expected to be back up at 6 a.m. to kind of do it all again. So it's a lot of sleep deprivation and exhaustion and really not getting the things that they need on tour when they need it. And then that coming home process, that re-entry into real life is really a sticking point for a lot of people on tour.
What is it about going home that's the big sticking point?
For a lot of people, it's you go from having structure. You go from having every minute of your day planned out. You go from being needed at all times to a silence that you're not used to. Another part of that is you also go home to a life that, that moved this way while you move this way. I always liken it to be kind of like trapped in purgatory, right? Like where life kind of moves on without you. And I'm sure, you've had plenty of artists on here that I'm sure could talk about that too, where it's all their friends graduated, all their friends got married, all their friends got had kids, and now they came home and they're kind of still in their 20s, mentally, emotionally, where it's like, wait, life moved on without me. What do I do now? It's not the same friend group. It's not the same this, that, so there's a lot of different things that I think making going home especially challenging unless you have like a really good routine or a really good support system.
So what can people do if they're in that situation to, I guess, ground themselves?
If you're not thinking about what home is going to look like a week, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks before tour is ending, you're losing time that you could be. When I get home, I don't want to see 25 people in my house for a party. As soon as I get home, I need to come home and I need to sleep in my own bed and have a good night's sleep that isn't in a bunk of a bus or a hotel or whatever that might be. I need to not go straight into, some people work 9 to 5 jobs when they get home. Because touring is not always lucrative for everyone. So it's, I need to make sure that I'm not scheduling work the first 3 days I'm home. It's just kind of moving the pieces around so that you're allowing your body to land and your brain to land before you start rushing back into things. Obviously, if you have kids, if you have things going on, you can't always do that. So that's when it's important to really have a good open communication with your partner or your support system and letting them know what you need and what you can be available for.
And is that what you find you end up doing for a lot of people?
There is a lot of working on kind of the scheduling and kind of those executive functioning sort of things that get lost on tour when you're doing a million things and it's impossible to figure all that out. So I work a lot with people on how to land when they get home and what they might need to do, and what could be helpful, what isn't helpful. And then once they're home, how to kind of re-enter the space, right? Re-enter the social space, re-enter their relationship, how to, slowly integrate themselves back into that, and then rinse and repeat when it's time to go back out on tour. Now we have to prepare for going on tour and what that's going to look like. So it's a cycle, but it's doable.
It seems like you're really helping people, I guess, with the grounding of the job. I'm curious, because obviously we're in the arts, and I feel like, you're working with musicians within the arts, and anyone that seems to be in that field, for the most part, I feel like you get into it because you have a love for it. And I think that I'm trying to put this in the most, I guess, politically correct way, but I think people within the arts tend to maybe be more open with mental health. The reason why they're in arts a lot of the times is because we tend to be more expressive with our mental health. So I don't want to say that there's more mental health issues within the art space, but like, that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that within the art space, at least we talk about it more, and there's maybe less of a stigma. Like, people are just more willing to talk about it. So I'm curious if that leaks into your sessions of them turning into full out like personal therapy sessions. Are you doing that end of things as well, or is it more about the day to day and the job?
It kind of leads into both. I think it's natural to have these conversations. If you're talking about communication, you're bound to get into subjects that are going to talk about how you've communicated your whole life. What was your communication style like when you were growing up? And how does that still affect you when you try and talk to your partner when all you ever saw was abusive language growing up, right? Like, so all of those things kind of happen. And I think you're correct. Not now there's a lot, we're moving in a better direction. I wouldn't say we're perfect, because we're not even close to where I think it needs to be. If we're talking about like my era of being in a band, there was no such thing as mental health, and there was no such thing as getting help. You had like To Write Love on Our Arms, but that wasn't really like anything that made sense for artists. I feel like it was more for like the scene and the concert, the people attending concerts and different things like that, to find community. And now you have a lot more great companies kind of around. There's Backline, there's Heart Support, there's Hope for a Day, there's a million companies. So that's getting better. But yeah, like I think it's impossible for, even when you're working on more day-to-day career oriented stuff, it's impossible not to get into those spaces where someone's getting into a fight with another crew member and you're navigating that, or someone is going through a divorce while they're on the road, or they're missing their kid's birthday. Those things come up, and we address them when they come up, and we have that conversation about those things. So yeah, like there is space where that does bleed into the conversations.
Yeah, I just didn't want to say like that, like everyone who works in the music space is mentally ill. Like, I just didn't want it to come off like that. But I think that, like, within the music space, we're a lot more expressive or open with our emotions, especially now. I think we were kind of, especially in the 2000s, I think we were kind of starting to become self-aware, but also there was such a stigma that nobody wanted to actually admit it. But I mean, like, let's be real, that's why we were listening to emo music. It was because we, had these feelings and emotions, didn't know how to process or express them. And the music was doing it for us, right? Whether you were a fan or a musician.
100%. And now you have, like, I mean, if we think about that time, like, there were no metal bands or hardcore bands that were coming out and publicly talking about their mental health and publicly talking about things. Sure, it was in their music, and we could assume or we could say, like, I wonder what's going on there. But now you have people that are some of the biggest people in the genres, and, people that are just starting out, that are starting out talking about mental health and talking about how important it is. And I think from a fan to artist, artist back to fan and crew, I think it's only for the best, because I think it humanizes everyone, and it takes a little bit away from what we might have seen in the 2000s, where there was and beyond, where there was this kind of pedestal stuff going on, where now it's like, oh wait, that person's a human. That person isn't this or this or this or what I thought. That person has issues just like me, and we're all talking about it, and we're all seeing the spaces in different ways than we did before.
It's funny that you said that, because like I think about that often, about how I used to think that some of these bands were actually like the biggest bands and the coolest, and put them on a pedestal when I was 14, 15 going to shows. And now I look back and I'm like, they were just teenagers on a 1 foot tall soapbox, basically singing songs, and they were just trying to cut their teeth. They were just doing their art. But to me, they were like rock stars. But in reality, they probably were losing money playing that gig more than they were making money.
100%. I think that still is true, even for some bands that we see that we think are doing it at a grand scale. Like, I think the problems just change. I think that they all those 17-year-old, 18-year-old guys just have different problems now, right? Like, especially if you look at all the bands that kind of like survived up until now, I think the problems just shifted, where it was like back in the day they had these things, but now they're 40 years old dealing with depression and anxiety. And it's probably even worse now. They just have like Lexapro, or they have something else where they're able to kind of be like, oh, I can manage this now without drinking a whole bottle of whiskey or talking to 40 million different fans at a time, or doing something, ridiculous, where it's like now the problems shift. And I think we're headed in a good direction, as far as the people that have the voice are using it in better ways now.
You mentioned that it's gotten better, but it's not where you feel it should be yet. What differences do you think need to be made to get it there?
From a backstage crew standpoint and artist standpoint, we need to recognize that mental health should just be part of the fabric. It shouldn't be a luxury. It shouldn't be treated as a luxury. If we have budgets for alcohol and different things, there should be budgets for mental health services, not just when someone affects the bottom line or when someone affects a headline, right? There should be already things in place that help to contain and help to not have these things where it's like, oh, this full world tour just got canceled, and now you have how many crew members out of a job? You have all these artists. And from the other side, we need to make sure that the fans feel like they're in a safe environment and feel like they're in a place where, if this is the safest place they're going to be, that maybe this is the place where they could also get help. So having resources for on the fan side, but also making sure that mental health is just as much a part of the fabric as catering is for the crew and the band. Because, a lot of people like to go at me on Instagram that like all this stuff exists and all these things happen. And then, but I haven't talked to one crew member that has said that's true. So I'm going to keep, ringing that bell until that happens.
I think that's a very excellent point. And obviously, I'm sure you want people to come to you and support you for this. But, how many services are there out there that people can actually reach out to? And obviously, I'm not asking you to promote anyone else, but
no,
I mean,
no.
Are there other support systems, mechanisms, or anything like that people can look to do to help them out that's outside of calling up Daniel Rinaldi?
100%. I mean, Backline is a great company. I work with them often. Backline actually created the first like emergency number for crew artist specific needs, which was phenomenal and fantastic. You know, they're a organization where you go, you sign up, and they try and place you with a coach, a therapist, whatever you might need in their referral network. So they're there. There's I think Heart Support does more peer to peer stuff. There's a Sims Foundation. You know, there's obviously like Try Love in Our Arms, Hope for a Day, Punk Rock Saves Lives. Like there's all of these. Amber Health is another one. There are plenty of companies out there that are able to facilitate some sort of level of help in the scene, whether it be from the fan side or crew and artist side.
And what would be, I'm thinking to like when I was out looking to find a therapist, and I know that a lot of my listeners are in the States, I'm in Canada, so maybe some things are different, but up here it's not easy either. And I remember looking through websites and Googling, like, how the hell do I even find one? And then, I found a website where it's basically like an Expedia for therapists. You're just kind of going through and clicking, and like, there's a name, and there's like, I specialize in this, and they all specialize in the same things. And because they're just clicking off every single box. And then, it's like, how do you choose one? How do you find one? Then you go and you're like, okay, this person sounds good. And you go and you click, and either they're way too expensive, or they don't have any booking times, or, like, it can be really, really hard to find support and help and therapists up here. What do you recommend if someone was actually looking to seek out help? Who to reach out to, where to go, how to find some of these resources outside of just kind of looking at the companies that you named?
One of the most popular ones here in the States is Psychology Today, which is I'm pretty sure it also services Canada.
That's probably the one that I was on that I just said is like Expedia for therapists.
I was on there until I wasn't. And what I found is most therapists that you are going to email on there are either not going to get back to you, or they're not, like you said, they're clicking off boxes. They're kind of writing a bio that's meant to attract customers, not meant to like really speak to you, right? Like there's a whole like obviously in the age of the internet, there's a whole psychology around writing your bio. There are people who make money off of writing your Psychology Today bio to attract customers. So what I always tell people is like, if that's the route you have to go, don't be afraid to email as many as you need to and treat it as an interview process. Anyone who's willing to give you a free 15-minute consultation, which they should, no matter what, take that and use that as an interview process. Ask them any and all questions that you want to ask them. And don't be afraid to say, no, thank you. You are not who I'm looking for. Never feel pressured. If you feel pressured, that is not the therapist or coach or whoever for you. I always say, look local first. You're going to find a lot of great niche coaches, therapists, whatever, that are probably right around you that aren't on those sites, that aren't utilizing that would probably be a better fit than some of the typical kind of like Expedia-esque, people that are on there. For it, like, I don't look like half of the people on those sites. Like, I have Pokemon stuff, I have records, I have different things. And then there's people on there who wouldn't dare put that in their photos because it's not marketable, right? So those are the things to be careful about. I think look local first, and see what's around you. And then if you have to go onto those things, treat them like an interview process. Find the people that are going to give you the free consultation. And also, if financials are an issue, look for things like sliding scale is a word that most people don't know about. Some people do offer pro bono free counseling. And there are nonprofit companies that will provide grant money to people to go and get therapy. I know Backline does some work with that, where I work with people that are actively using grants that they've gotten to access therapy. So those are all things to kind of think about, whether you're struggling financially or it's just overwhelming. It's like the easiest way is to cut out all those websites that drive you crazy and look local first.
Yeah, you know what? That's actually really good advice, because I will say the reason why I bring that up is because when I remember when I was looking, it was Psychology Today, and I did exactly what you said, went through a bunch of them, sent out a bunch of emails, almost did a bunch of interviews to see. And it is a very overwhelming, I think, process to begin with for a lot of people. So if you are looking for someone out there, like, just know it's overwhelming for everyone.
Yeah.
But, eventually I think you got to find the person that's going to be right for you. Right. So I had a few conversations, eventually found someone that was roughly around my age. And I was just like, you know what? I didn't feel like I wanted a boomer that I felt like wouldn't be able to get where I was coming from. And so found someone fantastic through that process, which I think is great. But yeah, I think that those types of things, at least they are out there. Now, if you were, let's say you were talking to me, and I'm a touring crew member, and I do need grounding on my own because of the things that crew members go through. What advice would you give me or a crew member on how to ground yourself through everything that you mentioned, that well, not everything, but the main things that they go through, missing family members' birthdays while out on tour, and burning out on doing those crazy shifts where you work till 4 a.m. and start again at 6 a.m. What are some things that people can do for the people that haven't done a session with you, that may be listening because they were scrolling through Spotify or through YouTube, and they were like, whoa, this relates to me and my career. And I experience all of these things that Daniel is saying. What are some common things and tools that you give to your clients that the people listening that this applies to can start using today?
The most important thing to understand is, like, being on tour is a different animal. So it requires different tools and different things. It's not just taking what you see in general therapy or general mental health. It's trying to adapt those things to the touring environment, to not being able to have a bed or not have a space of your own to kind of go through. So there are times where, we kind of work within the bounds of the venue, right? And we try and find spaces where we can ground ourselves, whether that's, utilizing breathing exercises or actual physical grounding, where we're working on, like, understanding where our feet are, where we're planted, and kind of what's around us. There's times where we've utilized buckets of ice to kind of, like, get the nervous system readjusted when we're having those moments where it's like, this is all too much. And we kind of need to reprogram that and take a look at that. With missing family and relationship struggles, it's really about creating different touch points that are comfortable for you, right? It's finding what works for each individual. For some, I'll give you an example. For some people, it's understanding the expectation between both of you on tour. It's understanding that it might not always be a phone call, but it can be a voice note. It might not always be a voice note, but it can be a text message, and not holding that against each other, and kind of working really hard to make sure that that communication is there from the beginning, so that over the time of tour, you can have these different touch points that don't create, like, you didn't get on the phone with me at 3 a.m. It's like, well, no, I only had time to do this. And we both understand that. I've had clients where they share, the husband, the wife, and the kids actually share all one document, and they put their things about their day, pictures, different things, all in this kind of journal-esque document that really creates a beautiful sense of feeling like you're not missing out, and you're not necessarily, that removed. So about your kid's soccer goal. Your wife puts in the picture, you put in the picture of the beautiful place you're at and the sold out crowd. And it's just creating these different spaces that in theory they're simple, but I think we're not thinking of them when we're on the road and so stressed out. So a lot of it is finding the mental and physical spaces on tour that we can get out and move to and remove ourselves from the stress. And then what are the touch points with family members, missing birthdays, things like that. Maybe you can't be there for that birthday, but can you get on FaceTime for the candle blowout? You don't necessarily have to have your face on there. If you're at front of house, turn the phone on and just have the candles on there and just knowing that you're there. So it's just these simple tricks that we're just not utilizing, that when you're talking about it with someone who's kind of removed from it, you're able to come up with these things, or you're able to kind of facilitate these things for people.
Yeah, I think those are all fantastic ideas. And it's actually fascinating on my end of things. I'm as someone that doesn't tour, to hear how there are different ways to connect and do that. And I mean, I think this is why you're the expert in the in the field, right? I've run out of questions to ask you. I feel like we've covered a lot, but also because this is such an important topic, because it is such an important, I think, episode for a lot of people. Is there anything that maybe I didn't ask, or any conversation that we didn't have that you wanted to bring up or talk about a little bit more?
Where I sit in this, coming from the background that I've come from and now re-entering and seeing things, I think it's really up to a lot of different people to come together and make sure that we're focusing our energies in different ways. It doesn't always have to be about the bottom line and the money made. That's going to happen, right? That's going to naturally happen. But we need to make sure that we're keeping people healthy and we're keeping people here, especially. We've experienced a lot of suicide in the past couple years in the industry, and we need to work to make sure that we're creating spaces where there are places for people to go, and that's not happening now. So that needs to happen. We need to focus more on that. And then I think, as we're talking, and as hearing you say fans and people at the show, and I've watched so many of your episodes with so many people that I look up to and love and respect. It's also about making sure we're keeping these spaces safe. I think we take for granted what a concert does and is for the people attending. That might be the only place they feel like themselves. That might be the only place that they go to and they feel free. You might have a kid who is being, physically abused, where that's the place that now they're at. We need to make sure that stays a safe place. And I think what that means is understanding that we all have a job to do. We all have things that we can bring to the table to ensure that those things stay safe, and those places stay places where, not only are we giving resources to the people coming in that are putting on the show and a part of the show, but we're also making sure that there's constantly resources for the fans attending the show, especially the younger people. We're from the Tumblr era, right? Where people just shouted into the void. We don't want that to happen. We want someone to come to a show and be able to access a resource and say, I was at this show, I felt comfortable enough to finally call this number, or finally do this or do that. So I think, we need to make sure that that's happening. There's no reason why a venue can't put up numbers, resources, point you in the right direction. Why don't we have resources at merch, resources here, resources there, that are going out to these shows? Or why aren't venues reaching out to the community and working with mental health resources to say, hey, we have not, I'm not trying to put a microscope on metalcore, but like, we have this metalcore show coming through. We really love for a presence to be there for people who might want to chat for 15 minutes just to know what resources are available to them. I think that would go a long way. I think festivals, it would go a long way. I think about my time back on Warped Tour where it was just kind of a free for all and the Wild West. And there was a lot of terrible things that happened, and a lot of things could have been contained if we were focused. And now we have the resources to focus our energies there. So why not do that? So I think that's kind of my soapbox moment of like, let's just make sure that like we have the resources. There are people out there. There are people that want to help. Let's not treat it as like, oh, we can't afford this person. We can't do this. We can't do that. We can't afford this. Most of the time, these people are going to walk in and want to help regardless. Like if I could do it for free, I would do it for free tomorrow. Like I would love nothing more than to be able to access every artist and crew member in the world and say, here's free services. Let's chat. So how do we make it accessible? And I think the more the higher ups start to take a look at it and go, man, it would be nice not to cancel this tour. It would be nice not to have this insane turnover of crew. It'd be nice to know that like our crews are out there and they're happy and they're taken care of. That's when we'll start to see that. But I think from both ends, there needs to be more resources and more availability.
Is there anything that fans or that listeners can do to help with that?
I've been to a million shows and I've been to all sorts of genres and all sorts of stuff like that. And I think with fans, if there are companies, if there are places that allow for like peer groups, peer-to-peer stuff, like, back in the day when there was like street teams showed up, right? And there were people at shows and they were out there. Wouldn't it be lovely if there were peer groups that were available at shows to where, and it doesn't only have to be mental health. We could talk about, allyship, all sorts of stuff that could be available at shows that just isn't when you go to shows. So I think fans can, take it upon themselves, I think, to kind of create the community that they want to be in. And if that means, hey, we're going to meet up before the show and we're going to take a walk through the city together and we're going to talk about, this is what we're talking about, right? Creating walking groups, creating groups that meet up before or after the show, creating groups that are in more of the lobby space that are going to be around to help someone who's overwhelmed at a show, to help someone who is maybe harassed at a show where maybe the venue isn't helping them. And this person is a little bit more available to listen and point them in a direction. Right? Like those are all things. So I think it's what can you do as a community and as a scene? And then how can you hold your venues and all these other places accountable and say, hey, we have this, we'd love to bring this in. This is what it can do for you.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that was specifically because I know that there's going to be people that listen to this episode that are going to be like, well, how can I do something? I want to do something, whereas I think if we talk about activations at concerts, there's only so much that we can actually do because that ends up being put into something that's, I guess, above us. It's not necessarily our decision. That's the venue or the band or whatever, right? Whereas as fans, I think the reason why a lot of us fell in love with this scene is because, like you mentioned earlier, it was a safe space for us to go to. We didn't feel like we necessarily fit in with the outside world or with society. And all of a sudden you go to a concert and it's a punk rock concert or it's an emo concert and you're like, oh, look at all these other people that feel the exact same way as me outside of these walls. Inside these walls, we are the society. We are the ones that we all fit in amongst each other because we're like the rejects. But outside of here, you go back home, you go to work, you go to school, and you don't feel like you fit in or like you're normal. At least that's the big reason as to why I started falling in love with the music when I was, 13 years old and going to my first show at 14 and being like, whoa, this is where I fit in. This is home. So I want that space. It's the reason why, I'm 34 years old and I still go to multiple shows and festivals a year. And Whereas most of my friends complain about their back standing for way too long. And I'm like,
Right.
that doesn't bother me. I'm having too much fun. I'm not feeling my back.
Right.
That's kind of what I'm thinking of in terms of like what people can do. But I think that sense of community is very, very important. I think that you've given us a lot to think about, to act on. And I think that you as a resource are fantastic for so many people working in the industry and the people that don't necessarily get they don't get the awards, they don't get the spotlight or any of that. So, I mean, kudos to you and thank you so much for doing what you do. You've listened to a bunch of the episodes. You know that I typically ask all my guests this one question. And I do want to give you a chance to shout out maybe some bands that you're listening to right now. But I know it's the mental health episode, but I don't want to take away from that portion of it. But also at the same time, I think that if people are watching and listening to this episode, their chances are they like the same music as you and as us. And maybe they can heal a little bit through music. So one of the questions that I ask at the end of each and every single episode is name an up and coming or underrated band that you're listening to right now that you think more people need to check out.
Having my band in Jersey back in the day, there's a great band, Late Waves from Jersey, who are really fantastic. I don't know if they're like, if this band's up, because like The Strike is like something really interesting to me. I mean, I feel like they're underrated, but I absolutely love their music. The band Camino is like, I know they're a little bit on the bigger side because they are going out with like 5 Seconds of Summer this summer and all that stuff. But I feel like they're still like a little secret that everyone like kind of keeps, and for whatever reason, but I think they're phenomenal and amazing and need all the love in the world. Phenomenal songwriters. So I think those, if we're going like one that's on the borderline, like I'm a huge like Marianas Trench fan. I know like Canadian group and all that stuff. I know
they're huge
they're
up here.
they're a big upper echelon, but like in the States, like not like not hugely represented, not they're not a radio band, anything here. But I think they're the way that dude can write an album is insane. So yeah, that's I think those are my up and coming, if they're up and coming or underrated.
You've named a few for people to check out if they haven't heard of them already.
I'm curious, what is yours? I don't know if people ask that question, but
a few people have asked me that. It's rare that people ask me that back, to be honest. But I think the biggest up and coming band that I'm listening to right now is probably Leisure Hour. They put out an album earlier this year. I haven't had them on the show yet. To be honest, I haven't asked them, which is on me. I probably should reach out and ask them to come on. But I'm really, really digging. They're more of like that like Midwest emo type of vibe.
Okay.
And yeah, they're absolutely fantastic. I absolutely adore the record that they put out this year. So
awesome.
That'd be my shout out for today. Many more. Awesome. We could get into it. That's a whole other podcast episode.
Yeah, right.
But Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your insight. Once again, I think that this is a fantastic conversation to have. It's an incredibly important conversation. I do want to remind people that if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, subscribe to the show, follow along, and leave a review. Those are the best ways that you can support the show. And of course, get more awesome interviews from OurSpace. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show again. And before I let you go, where can people find more of your stuff and more from you if they want to get in touch?
Instagram is really like the biggest platform that I use. Everything else is just confusing. So it's Daniel Rinaldi LMHC is where you can find me on there, or soundchecksesh.com. But all of that is on the Instagram, and my DMs are always open, and I always answer, and I'm always willing to chat with anyone who wants to chat about anything. So if anyone has questions, if anyone is curious about starting the process, not with me, but just in general, and has general questions, I'm always open to answer anything like that as well. So yeah, Instagram is the space to find me.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much again, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to OurSpace with Matt Batisse. If you enjoyed yourself, please support the show by subscribing and leaving a review.